Thank you, Carolyn. So I'm Sue LeBlanc. I'm the school library system coordinator at Madison-Oneida BOCES, which is sort of an area between Syracuse and Utica in upstate New York. My pronouns are she and her. I want to welcome you all to this fabulous event. I've been so excited about it. It's really a showcase of different ideas from colleagues from across the country. Just a reminder that in most cases, depending on the computer and software you're using, you have viewing options that you can change in Zoom, as we will be shifting. We have a number of people participating as presenters, and there might be different view options that work better for you. Each person, each group or individual will be presenting. We have 6 different individuals or groups presenting in the first hour of this, a 10-minute presentation each. And you'll hear at the 9-minute mark, we agreed that I would ring some kind of timer like this. So if you hear that, please don't be alarmed. It's just a reminder to our presenter that they have about a minute left. As Carolyn already mentioned, we invite you to share your questions via Q&A. I will be monitoring those questions. There's no guarantee, unfortunately, given how much information and presentations we're sort of packing into today, that we'll be able to answer all your questions, but we definitely encourage you to reach out to the individual presenters. Their contact information will be shared in the PowerPoint, and reach out directly to them. They would love to answer your questions directly as well if they're not answered today. And with that being said, I would like to turn the floor over to our first presenter, Danielle Apfelbaum.
Hi everyone, my name is Danielle Apfelbaum, and I'm going to be talking to you today a little bit about how I use Google Forms activities in my information literacy sessions. And right now I'm going to pop in the chat some links that'll give you some more information about how I use them. So I am the scholarly communications librarian at Farmingdale State College. And in addition to my scholarly communication activities, I also do instruction sessions. Next slide, please. So I'm using Google Forms in my classes now to conduct all of my activities. So you might be wondering why Google Forms. So aside from just the wastefulness of paper handouts, I switched to Google Forms for 2 key reasons, and that was accountability and feedback. One of the problems with paper handouts is that they kind of feel disposable. And so some students would answer 1 or 2 questions, get bored, and just not complete the activity. And shockingly, on more than one occasion, I did find students just making up answers. Like they would look like they were working diligently at their stations, at their computer, looking for articles and writing down titles and all the information about the article. And when I would walk around the station, they would be on Facebook or Google or doing something completely different than being in the databases. So I knew that I needed something that would create a scenario in which students couldn't fake their engagement with the hands-on searching activity. On the flip side, I also had students who put a tremendous amount of effort into each and every question. And in a lot of cases, it was still difficult to give them feedback. First, sometimes handwriting is really difficult to read, and I often couldn't make out their answers because, of course, we're pressed for time and they're writing away, trying to get all the information into the form. And second, paper handouts are kind of limited to self-reporting. So they do allow students to tell you what they found, but they don't really allow you to understand how they found it. You can't examine the source to determine if it actually meets the requirements of the exercise. And you can't see how the student arrived at that source. So did they use their limiters and keywords in a strategic manner, or did they just type something in randomly and get 1 or 2 relevant results? So this was a really important problem that I felt that I needed to address in my activities, because without knowing this, I really could not give students specific feedback about how to make their searches for their projects better. Next slide, please. So when you're creating Google Forms, I do have a few tips. So now you know I use them, some tips for actually creating them. So when you're choosing activity tasks, you want to begin by considering your objectives. If you don't typically start your planning with objectives, I do recommend it because it helps keep the session on track, and it really helps you figure out what's the most important thing that students need to engage in before they leave the session. So start by focusing on what's most important for students to be able to do by the end of the session. session, but do keep it brief. I always recommend aiming for no more than 6 tasks. 3 to 4 I find is ideal, and the sessions that we have, they're about 50 minutes altogether. Generally for my classes, it's most important that students are able to construct effective, simple searches, choose and apply limiters, and also choose a source that's going to meet the requirements for their particular assignment. For some classes like RAM 201, which I have a link here and I've popped that in the chat too, it's really important to the instructors that students understand not just why an article is scholarly, but how it also differs from popular resources. So I include that as a task. For other classes, experience with a variety of databases and citation tools is a priority for the instructor. So you'll see an example of that in the Biz 390 form that I've provided an example for as well. Next, you want to consider how you can best support your students so that they engage at an optimal level with the exercise. So I utilize question descriptions and video, images, and GIFs to this end. So if it's a priority that students engage with a particular database to find particular kinds of resources as part of the activity, then I use the description area to reduce friction by providing a direct link to the database. I also use the multimedia embed feature to show students how to give me what it is I am asking them for. So for instance, how to find the article or the search permalink, or how to generate a citation so that they can fill in that portion of the form. So when it comes to adding multimedia, there are a few things to be aware of. So you can embed images and GIFs right into the questions by clicking, there's a little image icon next to the question field. Again, you'll see this in the extended resources. To create an annotated image, like one you'll see in the templates that I provided, I just created a screenshot and used Microsoft Paint to add in the little annotation. And you can use products like Snagit from TechSmith to do this as well. If you want to create a GIF, which is more of a moving image than a video, you can create a really brief video, under 30 seconds is preferable, using a product like Snagit, Screencast-O-Matic, or TechSmith Capture, which I believe it replaced the product called Jing, if you may be familiar with it. Then you can just convert it into a GIF using a GIF converter. So there's standalone converters out there. I do believe I popped those in the resources as well. And if you're going to create a video, just know that you need to have it housed somewhere else. So you're going to need to place it on YouTube and pull it into the form before you can use it. So you can't upload videos directly to the form. I also started using response receipts because this enables the student to get a copy of their responses, and it'll be emailed to them as soon as they complete the form. So there's no need to follow up with me if they can't remember that great resource that they found in class for their project and popped into the form. They have a copy of all of that. And finally, where appropriate, build in reflection. So to avoid situations where students are just picking and submitting anything that pops up in their result list, make sure to ask them to explain their strategies and selections. So when they have to tell you why they chose something and why it is or isn't appropriate for the assignment, then they have to engage in evaluation, and it's a win-win no matter what they pick. So either they realize that they've selected something that wouldn't be a good fit for their assignment, and now they know why that is, or they chose carefully according to the parameters of the assignment, and they're able to articulate why their selection does meet the requirements for the assignment. And you'll see a question like this in the RAM 201 exercise, again, that I've linked to. Next slide, please. So finally, how do you actually get this to work in a class? So the biggest question I get about using Google Forms is, how do I juggle distributing the survey, getting responses, and responding to responses? So in a face-to-face class, it works like this. Students get the handout with a link to the handout. They access the electronic handout in the beginning of class. They make a copy for their own Google Drive account, and then they keep that digital version of the handout up on the screen. And if they want to look at the presentation as I'm giving it, they can access that from the handout as well. So it's basically an interactive handout that I just use Google Docs for. So when the presentation concludes, students then open up the activity from that electronic handout. They work on the activity while I walk around and ask them about their topics, their strategies, and field any questions. And while they're working on the activity, I pull up the spreadsheet on the projector where their answers are deposited. And as the answers come in, I hide the student's name, but I do review each student's topic and corresponding search permalink, and I show them in real time how, based on their topic, they can improve their results. Then I review each source and I let them now know how they can be sure that it does or does not meet the requirements of the assignment that they're working on. Then at the end of class, I add the instructors to the worksheet, and then they have a record of the student's participation. For electronic classes, it works exactly the same. The only difference is that I'm popping the link to all of these materials right in the chat. And the added benefit is that because we're doing it electronically, when I redo those searches and show them how they can improve them, I can actually pop in the link, the new permalink to those improved searches, and pop it right in the chat. So whichever student is working on that exercise actually has the opportunity to grab that updated search and use that for their project going forward. So that's really how I use Google Forms for my instruction sessions. Like I said, I'm going to pop the resources in again. So this is a link to a folder which has example forms, template forms. I am always happy to assist anybody if they would like some help getting started. Sometimes it's easier to be able to chat with somebody who's gotten something like this up and running because there is a little bit of a learning curve, not for the students to use the form, but as an instructor juggling all the moving parts. So if you have any questions, I'm also going to pop my email in the chat. So don't hesitate to reach out. And then there's also a link to a full demo, which gives you a better idea of what the forms look like and so on. So again, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm always happy to help if you're looking to incorporate Google Forms in your classroom. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Danielle. And next we're going to move on to Kathy Starks.
Hi, Kathy Starks. I'm in Johnson City, New York, but I teach at Owego Free Academy in Owego, New York, not Oswego, not Otsego, not, I can't even remember all the different variations of that are out there. And I'm hoping some of you get the reference to the Don't Panic. It's a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference, just in case anybody's wondering. Next slide, please. Oh, and first, let me just say, Danielle, thank you. That was awesome. It was really interesting to hear about using Google Forms. I love Google Forms, and I love finding out new ways and different ways to use it. So thank you. So I'll explain where this comes from. I had a teacher come to me and say she wanted to bring her students into the library, but she didn't want she didn't want me to teach anything because I'd already taught them everything they knew. So there was nothing new I could tell them. And I took that as a challenge. Well, yes, there is something new. These are high school students. How much do they know about the college library and the library after high school? The first place where I taught this was at a private school where all the kids they were all college bound. So that's where I started with the college library, but then I expanded upon with, because not every kid is going to be going to college out of high school. And I thought it was very important because they don't necessarily get instruction on how to use the college library. And so I wanted to give them a little bit of exposure to it. When I was doing the research, I did discover that library anxiety is a real thing. This is a link to an article. This is an older article, but it still applies. I'm sure there are newer articles that are out there. Kids get to college and sometimes you have this giant, marble place with columns and big stairs going up the front. And it can be very intimidating, or they might walk in. I'm thinking of Binghamton University's library that has the big tower up the middle. That's very different from their experience at the high school level. So, it's important to sort of acknowledge that it's okay to be kind of scared of the library at first, the college library or the public library, but good to kind of anticipate what they will see at the college level. Next slide, please. So when I talk with kids about library needs, I do address how they can use the public libraries. And it's very important for us to kind of think about the role of the public library in both their lives outside of high school, but also in their learning and their education. It's important for them to know, especially if they're going off to college somewhere where they haven't been before, to know that their public library is available for them. And it's a great place for free Wi-Fi if they're having some problem in their dorm. It's some place that's other. It's also a place that has a lot of, the thing that's really cool about the public libraries these days is how much is available outside of traditional print books. And they can download audiobooks, they can download videos, they can download ebooks, and all those are free. And it's also important for kids to know about the access to the New York Public Library. And by the way, all the links on the slides are all live links. So it'll take, if you wanted to go to the New York Public Library site, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir on this, but I hope everybody knows that everyone in New York State with a New York State driver's license has free access to the New York Public Library, and you don't have to drive down there and get access. You can, there's the link that's in there will take you to where you can sign up for a free digital card from the New York Public Library. And so there's just tons of different ways for people to access material outside of either their own school environment or whatever they have access to personally. Next slide, please. Okay, so when I am talking to students about what they'll see at the college library, I like to be able to look at, to show them what a college library site looks like. And I think for academic librarians, it's important for them to know that a lot of these kids have never seen anything beyond perhaps their own school library databases. You know, it depends on what the school is subscribed to, what's available, and there's a lot of free things that are available through Novel New York. But perhaps they've been used to looking at maybe 10 databases. So it's very important for them to know that at the college, they're going to have, as you all know, hundreds of databases, and that can be overwhelming. So I like to spend some time kind of thinking, having them look at their own school's library site, what they see there, again, the number of databases that are available. And these are all the things I like to talk about, especially Library of Congress. Kids have been used to Dewey Decimal System since they were in kindergarten. And all of a sudden they're faced with Library of Congress organization, and it's very intimidating. And I'm actually going to address that on the next slide. So it's one of those things that it's important for them to have to, you know, for me to raise their awareness on that. A lot of them won't know what ILL is. They won't know that there are going to be things that are available to them beyond their particular environment. As far as the databases are concerned, again, for most academic libraries, you've got content area databases, and they'll have been used to mostly seeing sort of a general list. I have reorganized my library's databases, so now they're content based, because I know that I want to prepare them for what they'll see when they get, you know, when they get to college, but they're not going to always have that. It's also important for high school students to have exposure to scholarly peer-reviewed material. We have some college courses that are done through TC3 at my school, and they require kids to have access to the scholarly peer-reviewed material, but not everybody's going to necessarily have that. And so when they get to college, scholarly peer-reviewed material, as we all know, is a very different animal. And so they need to learn. Perhaps they don't need to read an entire article. They can skim the abstract. They need to know what an abstract is. They know to maybe look at the hypothesis, look at the methodology, look at the conclusion. That's going to save them a huge amount of stress when they move on. So those are the kind of things that, again, I try to initiate with my students, but also that people know when there are first-year students that these are the kind of things they might not have exposure to. Next slide, please. Search strategies are another thing that's very important for students to know about, and they might not necessarily have exposure to it. You know, we talk about Boolean searching, but and I think some of the later topics are going to be about how you search well and effectively. But it's important for them to know that there are different methods of searching other than you know, your basic questions that students have been used to. So that, again, that's something that I try to address with my students, but they're going to need to know at another level. I also had here this, this is a worksheet. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I can't remember who it's from. This is the link up there is to the university. Academic libraries will often provide research guides, and so students need to know that. They're going to be research guides. Use them. Don't just stew and wonder. I get kids that email me every year in the fall, Ms. Starks, how do I do APA formatting? And I always remind them, look at your college library. There's going to be some of that information out there. So that's important for their kids to realize. Next slide, please. I'm watching my time here. So I did a neat thing and had a librarian from Binghamton University and a librarian from SUNY Broome come out to my school and do a presentation for my students. And they did the handout that's over on the right. If anybody wants that handout, just let me know, I can send it. And it says a lot of the same things that I've said already, but I love the way it really sort of nails the Library of Congress organization. So that was very good information for them. And I just try to emphasize over and over and over to them, it's okay. It's okay to be nervous about it. It's okay to be overwhelmed. There are people that can help you. I do have a link down there to the Purdue OWL. That is my #1 reference that I have out there for kids to make sure they go back. Whenever they have a problem, bookmark it, have the Purdue OWL up in front of them. It will give them whatever answers they need. And both of my children, when they were in college, their professors talked to them about using the Purdue OWL. So it's definitely, it's the online writing lab, if you're not familiar with Purdue OWL. And it gives you all the information that you need about constructing a research paper and your research guides and how to cite and all that kind of stuff. Okay, whew, that was a lot. I think my 10 minutes are up.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy. And if you have questions, you can reach out directly to Kathy as well. Next, if my order is correct, I believe we have Michelle Bishop and Ken Nichols from SUNY Oswego, and I did change the 9 minutes marker sound to make it a little more pleasant. So take it away, Michelle and Ken.
I will ask, could you reauthorize my video so that way I can turn it on? Or either way. Either way. Well, yeah, I'm Kenneth Nichols, and okay, yeah, there we go. I'm Kenneth Nichols, and that's Michelle Bishop, and we are both, I'm trying to start my video. I love the Zoom. There we go. Okay, and we are both at SUNY Oswego. I teach first year composition mostly, and Michelle is a librarian. I feel it's very important to join forces with the librarians because my students are trying to write papers. They need to research, and that's where the librarians come in. But the internet has offered us a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of challenges. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, there we go. How do we determine truth when we're doing a research paper? When we're finding out what's really going on, how do we determine what is real? And there's a lot of problems for students as they try to figure all of these things out. A lot of times they don't understand that even experts can disagree on things, and that's a good thing because Michelle and I are both experts in our field, but we'll have slight disagreements on things, and that's perfectly okay. And as a real-world example, back in January, people were still talking about whether or not we should wear multiple masks, the efficacy of doing that. And so Dr. Fauci, in the same week, 2 experts disagreed. Dr. Fauci said, well, it makes sense that it would likely be more effective. A student sees that and says, okay, well, that must be the truth. However, another expert in all of this, Dr. Michael Osterholm, said that it might actually be counterproductive and result in more infections. And two grown-ups and two intelligent people or as experienced people, we understand that, right, these two people know what they're talking about, but they just disagree because that's how things work. And so that's one of the challenges that we have. Next slide, please. My students, I have them write about things that matter to them, or at least I try to. So the big problem that I find in terms of trying to determine truth through misinformation is critical thinking. It's all based on that. A lot of times students are reluctant to do their own thought. They'll just Google their claim, right? The death penalty is bad, and then they'll just use the first 3 Google results to prove that, well, the death penalty is bad, instead of doing their own thinking. And a lot of times students don't want to stray from orthodoxy or to take sides in an argument, even if I'm explicitly telling them to come up with their own ideas. And even if their ideas are something that you disagree with, that's the whole point of the university system, is to explore ideas that you may discard or you may keep. And students often don't feel that they're part of the marketplace of ideas, which really bums me out, because they're bright, they're excited, they have all these experiences that they're trying to understand, but they don't feel like a participant, so they just take the easiest information that they can. And one of the biggest problems is that they don't understand the media landscape. They don't understand how an 8,000-word New Yorker article is probably more reliable than a 100-word article on USA Today. That's it's a paragraph about a study, and it's the same article on every other news site, right? 100 words. They don't understand the difference between a newspaper, a magazine, a book. Like, all of these things look the same on a computer screen, so they don't understand the differences. And it's important, these things have real life consequences, especially in terms of something like COVID. Should we wear 2 masks? Should we not? These have real life consequences. It matters, right? Students often also fall into blind trust instead of questioning everything, which they're mostly young people, so they should be questioning everything. And then there's a huge problem with understanding that there are gray areas in thought. People can disagree, and the truth is just like the world, very, very complicated. And so I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Thanks, Ken. Next slide, please. So as Ken has pointed out, the sometimes contradictory COVID-19 information shared with the public, even by experts, can make it difficult for us all to know what guidance to trust. On the right side of the screen, you'll see a screenshot of a false claim about COVID-19 that was shared with me by a family member. Most of us have probably seen this claim, and as educators, we're fairly expert at evaluating information sources and could quickly tell that it was false. But as evidenced by this message, many others don't necessarily have these skills to judge the quality of the information they encounter. According to a 2016 report from Stanford's Graduate School of Education, high school and college-age students have been found to struggle with this metacognitive skill, particularly with analyzing information on the open web. The report covered news literacy, as well as students' ability to judge Facebook and Twitter feeds, comments left in reader forums on news sites, blog posts, photographs, and other digital messages that shape public opinion. With the increasing use of social media to entertain and to inform, as educators, we have a responsibility to provide students with the most effective techniques to empower them as creators and consumers of information. The AASL standards charge school librarians with the preparation of all learners for college, career, and life. And in higher education, the ACRL framework charges academic librarians with teaching students that authority is constructed and contextual. In 2019, I'd been asked to teach source evaluation to an introductory English class. However, instead of requiring academic sources, the instructor specifically wanted students to use mostly popular sources. So like most librarians, I turned to the tried and true CRAP test, but I found it surprisingly inadequate. For years, I'd been using the CRAP test to teach students how to identify academic sources. However, I found 2 significant drawbacks to applying the CRAP test to evaluate popular sources. First, and this is likely because the test was initially developed to evaluate materials for addition to academic collections, I found that the test was not very effective when applied to popular source evaluation. The SIFT method, on the other hand, is better suited to evaluate social media and other popular sources of information. The SIFT method was created by Mike Holdfield. It's also known as the 4 moves, and it stands for stop, investigate the source, find better coverage, and trace to the original context. And I've heard the SIFT method included in previous sessions during the symposium. So last year, I began teaching the SIFT method within the context of evaluating the absolutely confusing and many times incorrect information about COVID-19. In addition to being better suited for evaluating popular sources, SIFT allows for the quick analysis of claims and sources versus the longer process it takes when applying the CRAP test. I found SIFT to be an effective approach to teach students how to evaluate COVID-19 information they encounter on the internet. Not only did I want them to be able to learn about how to evaluate information, I also wanted them to really understand how critical it is for all of us to be active consumers of information. So earlier, Ken talked about that sense of agency he'd like his students to develop. As I teach information literacy skills, I also make a concerted effort to show students where they can apply these skills outside of the classroom and across contexts. Since SIFT can be more readily applied to real-world encounters with information on the open web, I believe students are able to exercise more agency than is possible with the CRAP test. The students I worked with last year now have the tools to not only evaluate information for themselves, but to also play active roles in helping to stop the spread of misleading information online. Next slide, please. So if you'd like to learn more about the SIFT method, I've included a link to Mike Holdfield's website. The website also includes a free online course that takes about 3 hours to complete. You may also be interested in taking a closer look at that Stanford report that I talked about, and also the Pew Research Center survey results. And the links are all there. And I thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Michelle and Kenneth. You ran just under in time, so we didn't need the bell. Next, I believe on our next session presenters are Theresa and Franki from SUNY Farmingdale.
Hi, good afternoon. Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Theresa Zahor, and I'm a librarian at Farmingdale State College, located on Long Island. My colleague, Professor Franki Kessler, is a member of our English faculty and is a regular participant in our information literacy assessment program. That's what this is about today. At Farmingdale State College, we've been conducting assessment for incoming freshmen in our English 101 courses each semester for approximately the past 5 years. To answer the research question, are our incoming students information literate? In particular, are our incoming freshmen who have a requirement for a research paper college ready? I want to note this analysis was specifically requested by our college's internal assessment team to look at our students' performance and information literacy competencies, and it was subsequently used for our Middle States reaccreditation. Professor Kessler will review the process and assignment specifics, and I'll show you some of our library work, data analysis, and reporting. Next slide, please. Franki.
Okay. Well, I would like to see also the rest of the topics that are here. Maybe they will arrive one by one. Yes, there they are. Okay, so I teach research at Farmingdale. I teach English 1, and I teach research classes at Long Island University as well. The goal of teaching the research paper in English 101 is to prepare the students for success in college English, as well as many other subjects across the curriculum. This writing across the curriculum is something that is common in many educational institutions. So we're giving them tools that are going to actually help them in all of their courses, not just in English. Anyway, the goal is to prepare them for these essays, and we have worked together with the library to help improve the high school students and to really raise their level of literacy using the library to create a meaningful research paper. So we have had a lot of online and in-person instruction differences in the past year, and COVID made it so much more challenging, but we adapted and classes moved entirely online, and materials that we used migrated to Blackboard for everybody to use. Librarians use Google Docs, as we were talking about, for their interim evaluation of worksheets, and they incorporated videos to supplement their teaching. The students use more online materials and fewer print sources. So that was a change that we saw. Also, we evaluate the papers, as professors, we evaluate the papers for their writing quality, their content, their researchability, and their citation. And what happens is when these papers are finished, they are submitted to the librarians anonymously, just with their numbers attached. I'll get to that. But the librarians need to have objective evaluation of the papers. So that's the most important thing, that we get to that final point. So students come from different universities with different high school experience, and it's my job to make sure that they're all on the same page to understand not only the standards for writing, but the rules for citation as well. So at Farmingdale, we use the RAM Writers online textbook in my class, and that is created by the English department at Farmingdale, which has got a lot of explanations of writing basics. When we are talking about citation styles, that's when the library does become involved. The students are made aware of the differences between APA and MLA, and they also need to know that sometimes those citation styles change and there are updates, and where do they find the updates to the citation styles. Like Kathy just said, online, the Purdue OWL website, we use that a lot. I use that even just to check answers to questions from students. And I have put together here my assignment that I use for my students, and I have used over the past few semesters, which has worked very, very well with my students. So let's have a look at the next slide, please. Okay, I don't know, it's a little bit small. Maybe if you get a copy of the slide, you'll be able to look more closely. Basically, it is a topic for a 4-page research paper that is about their chosen profession or something they're interested in pursuing. And I find this very meaningful for the students because they really can make it their own, and they can also benefit from the research that they're doing with this exact paper. So they have to work with the librarians to identify good sources first, and then they use those sources to explain the profession, the availability of jobs, financial things, a lot of different things about their chosen profession. They then have to use 2 scholarly journals to be included in this, in the works cited page, and they have to know how to connect their in-text citations with the works cited page. So even though it's a short 4-page assignment, it does allow us to work with the students to get the responses that we need for the library. Next slide, please. Okay, so when we are doing our paper in our class, we are we follow a process which helps the librarians to follow the progress that is being made. So what we do is we first give the students a number, so that on no papers that they fill out for the library is their name seen. And so they'll get a number, you know, and they have to put that number on every single worksheet, all of these Google forms that Danielle was talking about and Theresa's going to talk some more about. Those have got the students' numbers on them so that they can be followed throughout the research process. So whatever worksheet they're using, whatever thing they're using, they're going to be putting their number on that. On completion, they submit their essays to me and they get evaluated by me and they get a grade. Separately, I send a copy of each paper without a name, just the number, to the librarians so that they can put it together with their information that they are gathering and so that they can make an objective evaluation. So this is all achieved by when I plan out my classes. First, I plan that they have a library instruction class. That's the first one, to teach them how to use the databases, how to search upwards. And then the second library session is to teach them about MLA citation and what are in-text citations and how do you make a works cited page. So I schedule these when I am planning my course, and we hand out the assignment in the first of those 2 library sessions. The librarians are aware of the topic before I teach my class, so they adapt their class and their examples they use to this assignment. So I am now going to hand it over to Theresa, who's going to go into more detail about how they evaluate the results of this.
Thank you, Franki. Next slide, please. Hi. So you'll notice on here, these library modules, a lot of them look very similar to most standard IL one-shot classes, although this is, for assessment purposes, we do break it out into 2 sessions, as Franki just mentioned. Session 1, we do an introduction to the library website and navigation, some resources, physical resources, but I have to say we did cut that down quite a bit in the assessment classes because we're spending quite a bit of time on it. But I will mention that we do have library videos on our physical resources, as well as a Goose Chase app, which is very similar to someone else spoke about in this Pillars Symposium, for getting students used to the physical library and where things are located. I want to mention, and this is interesting, it came up, I think, in a presentation during this Pillars conference from, I believe, the speaker from Stony Brook, about using open access resources as opposed to just strictly proprietary library systems. With respect to this particular research topic that Franki came up with for career research, I did switch the order. We found that using open access sources such as ONET and Occupational Outlook did provide the students with a lot of good background information that they needed for their researching their chosen career. And then we moved on to some of our proprietary databases. Of course, the books were a lot less accessible, except for ebooks during the closure for COVID. But we did go over Search Everything as well as some specific EBSCO databases as well. One other thing we did is we teach off of our English 101 research guide, which has all the appropriate resources listed. It would be the equivalent of a LibGuide from most colleges. We're limited to a content management system here, so we create our own research guides. We also employ a lot of research videos. One of my colleagues, Megan Marchese, who spoke yesterday afternoon, has created a bunch of really good videos that are for use for all students at any point in time, and they're hosted off of our library website. And for this particular class, we had to move all our IELTS classes, obviously, pivot to an online environment due to COVID. We are still teaching all online, including the assessment classes. So we have a selecting and refining research keywords video. We used to do in person for IELTS assessment classes, a in-class activity. Now we use this video. We are looking to see how we can incorporate that activity for keyword refinement in future upcoming IELTS assessment classes that are held online. We also have videos for citation, MLA, etc. For this class, it is MLA citation, both in text and a separate video for works cited. So those help out tremendously, particularly in the online environment. We did migrate the search strategy worksheet, which had previously in IELTS assessment classes been an in-class activity. So they could show us how they were starting their research, using keywords, locating articles, journal articles and databases, perhaps using open access sources, which was easy to do as an in-person class, walking around the class, see how they're doing. But what we did for this migration to Blackboard, we moved the search strategy worksheet to Google Forms, much like Danielle, one of my associates, spoke about earlier. Can you click next slide, please? All right, so the search strategy worksheet was moved online, and that really has been a big improvement. I'll say I'll probably continue to use this even in in-person classes when we return to in-person, because the students in this case for assessment classes put in their number, they enter in their keyword refinement, they enter in their search terms, they're entering results, they provide a citation, and of course I can see it all online. Now, with Professor Kessler's classes, we do assign this during the first session, and they have any time between the first session and the second session, which are generally spaced a couple weeks apart. But this allows me to see all the responses online. So I can take a quick look, see how many responses I've received. And also, this really points out who needs help and who doesn't. So it's been extremely helpful, and it was a result of moving over to the online environment, and we will continue to use this Google Docs going forward, even in in-person classes. So it's a very helpful tool. Next slide, please. All right, the assessment rubric. Just briefly, I'll go over this. When we're looking at this for IEL assessment, we are looking at 5 different criteria, 5 different standards based on information literacy competencies, current ACRL guidelines. We do rate each student paper anonymously, as Franki mentioned. The ratings are 1 to 4, does not meet, approaches, meets, and exceeds, and each paper gets a score for each of the 5 standards. Next slide, please. This is an example of the evaluation sheet. So we compiled for each. Franki's is one of the classes. We typically run 3 assessment sessions per semester. So all the student results are coded for each standard and receive the grade. Next slide, please. Reporting. So I mentioned before early on that this was a request from our internal assessment committee. This actually, to the right side of the screen, is a sample of a report we send to the assessment committee. We do have it per standard, the average scores of how the students did. So that's pretty interesting to see where they all fall. But I think it's also important to note that they came back after our first test of this, the pilot, they came back and said, can you include in your report any narrative? And I said, sure, what do you mean? And they said, any interventions you've used. So semester to semester, any changes we've had in our program, perhaps as a result of how the students did, or any tweaks the English professor would like to have in our program, any changes perhaps to the rubric that maybe would make it a lot clearer to evaluate each paper. We certainly had immediately, we broke out standard 5 from, using information ethically and legally to citation. We found immediately we needed to break it out to 5A, accesses information and uses information ethically and legally, meaning plagiarism, which luckily we don't have very much of. 5B, which is in-text citation. 5C, which is works cited page, because we saw that while the students may be using things ethically, they didn't do such a great job on citation. So that's, those are the type of things that report. So the data is compiled for all the classes evaluated, not individually. The student information, of course, is anonymous, and this is then submitted to the assessment committee. Next slide, please. So what did we find? Some outcomes. Well, we certainly found it was a great opportunity to fine tune our library training as the weaknesses were identified. And when I say weaknesses, I mean things we perhaps found we needed to reiterate. Okay, I'm getting the sound. 2 areas identified that were most of need in remediation was source identification and selection. And I know that has been a topic of some of these other sessions, as well as citation ability, both in text and works cited. I mentioned Google Forms was very successful for point-in-time intervention, so that was great. And relative to this Pillars Conference, I want to comment. Good job, everyone. Students who came to FSC with prior library research training from high school consistently performed better than those who had not received training. Probably no surprise, but it was nice to see. And for our perspective, librarians, it's very nice to read a beautifully well done paper that scores 3 to 4 range across all the categories, across all the standards. So that's a nice outcome. Okay, Frankie and I also sum up now. Frankie and I continue to work on this. We also both individually speak with and work with local high schools, trying to encourage the local high school librarians to conduct training. I call it pre-training at the high school level, because it really does impact how they perform at the college level. Thank you.
Thank you both. And next are the team from Pierce College.
Hi, I'm Liz Zitron, and I am a former librarian and now chair of the College Success Department at Pierce College. And I'm joined by my colleagues in the library, Kari, Whitney, Kelle Rose, and Beth Thoms. We are a very diverse community college that includes multiple campuses and satellite campuses at a military base and at local high schools. And we serve students that range from high school students who are earning college credit to former military, traditional age students, adults returning to college. So we see a wide variety of students. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little context, I am chair of the College Success Department, as I said, and College Success is a required class that nearly all students take for graduation. And this is a class that introduces them to not only how to be successful in college, but also gets them diving deeper into questions like, who am I? What am I doing here? What kind of career am I envisioning myself? What are my long-term educational and career goals? And we have information literacy as one of the outcomes for the class. We currently offer 2 different courses, a 3-credit and a 5-credit, and both meet the requirement for graduation. Now, prior to COVID, the library was providing in-person instruction for our grounded courses. And usually that would end up being anywhere from 160 to 180 classes over the academic year. Next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to my colleague.
Thanks, Liz. We had to quickly adapt, right, like everyone, to making these library sessions available to students in a fully online setting instead of the grounded sessions that we were doing before. So what we did was develop synchronous Zoom sessions with the librarian. So we redesigned the previous grounded library sessions and emphasized what was most important for students to know about accessing library resources when they couldn't actually visit the library in person. Because of the pandemic, many of these first-year students had never even been on campus yet, much less the library. So our goal was to introduce them to the library and librarians as resources for research and study to make their value tangible, even though it was virtual. So with the Zoom sessions, rather than each instructor's individual course, attending a library session together as a class like they would have done when it was grounded, we developed a schedule of available Zoom sessions and let students choose the one that worked best for them. We were deliberate in scheduling some sessions in early mornings, evenings, and Saturdays to try to accommodate as many students as possible. We had, working students, parents who were teaching their kids at home, and even students in different time zones. Sessions were taught by me and my colleague Kari, who's going to speak next. But as adjuncts, our hours were restricted. So if students had questions or couldn't attend one of the available sessions, Beth, who is a full-time librarian, was our main point of contact, and she would offer one-on-one sessions or small group sessions at other times if needed. So we developed a LibGuide where we included information about accessing the Zoom sessions and a link to a worksheet for the session. And there's a link to the LibGuide on there if you want, on the slide, so you can look at it later. The worksheet that we used had 2 parts. First was a preliminary activity designed to get students onto the library website before the session to look around a little bit at subject research guides and get a small taste of the library resources. And then the second part of the worksheet is what we completed during the Zoom session, but they had it in advance to get familiar with it if they wanted to. We also created a Canvas module for instructors to incorporate into their course, which explained the library session, linked out to the LibGuide, and included a brief assessment for students to complete after their library session. So just a Canvas quiz. Each quarter we learned and adapted, and one of those changes later was to add a sign-up form to the Canvas module as well, which was just a Microsoft form. So we would have better sense of how many students would be at each session and to create more accountability for the students to attend. So what did we do during the Zoom session? We began with some brief reflection questions to get in the right headspace, and then quickly reviewed the preliminary activity together. And then we spent the bulk of the time exploring Primo, the library catalog, to find sources. Students were asked to follow along on their own devices if that was possible, and the librarian also shared their screen. We performed 3 sample searches together on the same topic, with keywords getting more specific each time, noticing how the results changed. We explored different source types and using filters, especially to isolate online-only resources since the library was still closed. And finally, we explored all the ways to contact librarians for help in the future, especially while everything was virtual. We wanted to really show that the librarians are friendly and accessible and helpful, build that relationship, and show that the library is a valuable resource that will enhance their academic development and make them more comfortable to actually come into the library when they are back on campus. All students in these college success courses, there's a 3-credit and a 5-credit course, so that they were all required to attend this library session, which we called a library orientation. And then the students who were in the 5-credit course were also required to attend a second library session, which we called a research dive. And in the research dive, we explored the ACT UP model for evaluating sources, and then provided an active work session for students to practice using the ProQuest database to find sources for a specific research assignment that they had in the 5-credit class. So the librarian was a bit more in the background during the work session, allowing students to search on their own, practice applying ACT UP, and then ask questions if they needed. And so the librarian then wrapped it up at the end, and the students even sometimes helped each other during those sessions because they were searching for similar things on a common assignment. I mentioned a minute ago that each quarter we learned and adapted and made changes for the next quarter. So now my colleague Kari will tell you about some of the things that we learned. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so as Liz and Kelle explained, our college success classes went from mostly grounded to all online, including their associated library visits. And as has probably been the case with most of us, quickly pivoting from distance learning, from grounded to distance learning, there were challenges, wins, and takeaways. In fall 2020, we posted the session dates to that LibGuide for easy editing by the librarians, and Liz included the Zoom link in all of the individual Canvas courses, which were blueprinted for the instructors. Since Zoom bombing, hate crimes were occurring nationally and locally, we felt it pretty important that the Zoom info be protected in a college-only space. We expected that students needed schedule flexibility, so we made that broad range of times and dates available, as Kelle mentioned. And that was definitely a win. While our highest attendance was midweek and midday, we had good attendance at our early morning, evening, and Saturday sessions, as well as voiced appreciation for those timings. However, getting most of the students to the sessions was a challenge that first quarter. Expecting students to move between Canvas, the LibGuide, and then eventually to Zoom, even though everything was well outlined in the LibGuide, because, you know, we're librarians, created some confusion. College success is typically taken at the beginning of a student's college journey, so many of them are in their first weeks ever of college. And speaking of the first few weeks, we scheduled these sessions for the early weeks of the quarter, but what we found was that some instructors had locked their modules with different schedules in mind. So we'd failed to account for the college, we'd failed to account for the college success courses on a late start schedule. And then we have adjusted all of that timing in subsequent quarters. We also underestimated the amount of procrastination. Our last few sessions were around 80 some people, which was difficult to manage. And we did experience some student-to-student harassment that the instructor was unable to address in the melee. We've had some other difficulties as well, including that the sessions were designed and taught primarily by part-time adjunct librarians, but the questions were coming in from students and employees expecting immediate responses. Anyway, we've been fixing things along the way. We've had lots of support from our peers. And in spring 2021, we focused our energy into putting all of the information into a blueprinted College Success Canvas course that embeds a form widget for registration that doesn't require any sort of login, that includes the Zoom link in that registration form. And we've communicated much more broadly across the campus about where they're going to find all of these links and all that information, that it's all in that Canvas course, and what the process is for the students. Beth, do you want to wrap it up for us?
So yes, I'd just like to say, I think that for this as a pilot project and attempting to move our instruction, you know, when we moved to online only, we were just missing students. And so this was such a nice way to work with students remotely and get reconnected with them, and also for them to connect with the library. And we found that students were really missing us too, and missing that connection and interaction. And so we were really pleasantly surprised. There were some bumps along the way, but it just worked out well. It was a win-win for, I think, students and for us as well, to reconnect and feel like we were really making a difference in helping students with their research.
Great, thank you so much. And now we will move along to Amber Wessies from Union University.
Hi everyone, I'm Amber Wessies. I'm an instruction librarian here at Union University. My co-presenter, Julie Powell, is not able to be with us, but I did want to mention her since she helped so much with the project. Union University is a small private four-year school in Jackson, Tennessee. We have 3 additional satellite campuses in Nashville and Memphis. Julie works with our sports management program, and she and I began collaborating shortly after I got here about 2 years ago. So during one of our collaborative sessions, Julie and I realized how often we assume that students can do something or they prefer a specific type of instruction style. As we were discussing ways to improve our instruction, Julie mentioned research and appreciative inquiry. After discussing some of the basics of appreciative inquiry, or AI, we decided that this would be a great approach with our students. AI allows us to reflect on our lessons and gain insight through positive questioning. Today, I'm going to discuss appreciative inquiry and how to apply it as informal assessment, reflecting on your teaching, and to meet the needs of your students. Next slide, please. I like to describe appreciative inquiry as a problem-solving method that looks at things positively. You take things that are already going well and incorporate them into areas that are problems. Whitney and Trosten Bloom describe AI as the study of what gives life to human systems when they function at their best. Appreciative inquiry uses positive questioning asked in interviews to find solutions. Participants are encouraged to imagine the best outcome of a future before determining how to make that a reality. An AI mindset encourages Julie and I to ask questions in all our interactions rather than assuming. Appreciative inquiry is as much a mindset as it is a process. You can change your thinking and habits to include positive framing and affirmative questioning. AI, the process, is built in a cycle with 4 or 5 steps identified as either discover, dream, design, destiny, or define, discover, dream, design, and deploy. Although the steps are different in number and name, this idea is similar. To begin, you need to positively frame your task or problem, then write your interview questions. Next, you would conduct one-on-one interviews or small group interviews. After the interviews, the group comes together for creating a plan of action. Finally, you implement your plan of action. Modifications to these steps can be made to match your particular situation. You may ask yourself affirmative questions and then create your own plan of action if you're doing this independently. You can also try the SOAR method, which builds on the SWOT analysis model, but it incorporates appreciative inquiry. In the SOAR method, you would identify strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. You would want to ask yourselves these questions. What can I or what can we build on? What are our stakeholders or students asking for? What do we care deeply about? And how do we know that we're succeeding in these endeavors? Next slide, please. So how does appreciative inquiry apply to our library instruction? We use AI techniques to determine what our students know and what they desire to know. We can use this to improve our instruction. One way to incorporate an AI mindset is using the name it, flip it, and frame it process, where you state the problem or the complaint, you flip it to a positive opposite, and identify the positive impact of that flip. So for example, the problem may be lack of internet access, which was common during the pandemic. We flip it to internet access for all. Our positive impact would be the emotional and social connection that people have through internet access, as well as increased educational opportunities. Then you ask yourself, what does this actually look like? And put that plan into action. Another example would be the problem of student engagement or lack of student engagement. The flip or positive opposite is all students are engaged. The positive impact would be students have a deeper understanding of concepts or can apply concepts independently after the instruction. Then you might ask yourself, what does this look like, or what needs to happen for students to be engaged? You may also choose to ask your students affirmative questions during or after your lesson as part of informal assessment. You might ask the students, which part of your research are you most comfortable with, or what tip can you give a friend about conducting research? Lastly, you can ask questions about students' prior knowledge and skills rather than assuming. At the beginning of the lesson or unit, if you have that opportunity, you might give a pretest to see what students know and focus your future lessons or current lesson on those skills instead of repeating something they already know. It may also be helpful to try a KWL chart or a know, want to know, and learn chart. If you're using a KWL chart, you present the topic and ask students what they already know, what they'd like to know, and then at the end of your lesson, you recap and list what they've learned. This allows you to stay on topic and also understand what the students know. Next slide, please. We've discussed appreciative inquiry, what it is, the process behind it, and a few ways to incorporate it in your lessons. Finally, I'd like to end my presentation by looking at the different types of questions you can use during an AI interview and what these would look like if you're reflecting on your instruction. In AI, we want our questions to be affirmative or positive. When doing this with a group, you may want to start your interview with a lead-in scenario to set the stage for the rest of the questions. After setting the stage, you would ask a backward question, inward question, forward question, and finally a transition question. A backward question is one that helps you remember a great experience, like describing the best lesson or session you've ever taught. Next, you'd ask an inward question that helps you find meaning in your backward question's answer. You might ask, thinking back to the best lesson you've ever taught, what about your teaching made it the best lesson? A forward question then encourages you to think about your hopes and dreams. Ask yourself what it would look like 5 years from now if every lesson was your best lesson. Finally, you move to a transition question, which helps you create a plan for your dream future to become true. You might ask yourself to imagine 5 years from now, what teaching styles were most helpful in teaching your best lesson every lesson. The idea of using affirmative inquiry questions can be asked to students as well. You can use a similar idea to improve teaching by asking students to describe a lesson where they learned the most or where they were the most engaged. Ask them what they did or what the teacher did to make this lesson successful. In your forward thinking, you can give your students the opportunity to give creative ideas for future lessons by asking students to describe an even better lesson or methods for keeping them engaged. As you can see, there are many ways you could incorporate the mindset and process of appreciative inquiry. For more information on AI, please see my reference list, which is linked at the bottom of this slide, or contact Julie or myself, and we'd be happy to continue this discussion with you.
Great, thank you, Amber. And thank you all for these wonderful ideas and information. We are now going to transition to the roundtable sort of discussion portion of our event. And those representatives from each group will be joining us to answer some questions. We're going to sort of reply in kind of a random format. We ask people to be as succinct as possible while still conveying your important ideas. And we will go ahead and get started with that. The first question is, what was the biggest challenge in implementing your program or method of instruction? I asked panelists to raise their hands if they're interested in responding to this. I see Franki with her hand raised. So Franki, why don't we start with you?
Hi. So one of the challenges that I find when students do come from high school is they think they know how to do research and how to cite things, but actually they know very briefly how to cite things and how to do a works cited page. They could maybe write just one line or two lines. They have no appreciation for in-text citations, and they have no, most of the time they are really not sure how to link in-text citations with the works cited page. So where they often come, you know, proud of their abilities to do it, I have to sometimes take it back a few steps and break it down for them so that they are kind of starting their research career, you know, all from the same point, you know, so.
Great points. Thank you, Franki. Kathy?
Well, and I'm thinking of the challenges of this year particularly, and some of you probably have the same challenges. I had to think about the fact that the databases that we use, the digital databases, had to be accessed remotely at times when the students were at home. And so a lot of times with the database vendors, there's a remote access. And so you had to figure out how to get the remote access information out so that students could successfully access. And then sometimes it depended on what browser they were using. And so it was a constant troubleshooting process to figure out how to make sure they all had access. It wasn't just about having internet or having a device. There were so many different ways to be able to get to the digital material, and you had to sit there and figure all the pieces out.
Thank you, Kathy. Kelle.
Yeah, thank you. Well, just to build a little bit on what Kathy was saying around the technical challenges that for us in our synchronous Zoom sessions, technology definitely was always playing a role. Sometimes it was the Zoom platform itself. There were students who had not used Zoom before, of course, for lots. That's been true for lots of people, right? But even back into this, you know, this last spring quarter, there were still students maybe who had never used Zoom before. And then there, of course, the safety issues with Zoom, the Zoom bombing, monitoring the chat, and just being able to alternate, right, with all the different devices. Can you watch Zoom, follow along what the librarian's doing, and still do it yourself on your own device? Can you listen? Can you have your video on? Can you talk? You know, figuring all those pieces out. And then also since our sessions were synchronous, even though the college success classes they were taking were asynchronous for the most part, our library sessions were synchronous. So figuring out time zones, we had international students who, you know, at the beginning of the pandemic weren't able to travel. So they were in Asia trying to still take classes. So they were trying to find a session at a time, you know, that wasn't like 3 a.m. for them. But sometimes students were doing that. And also some of our students were military students stationed overseas as well. So you know, just trying to keep the timing equitable was a challenge. And then communication, always communicating with instructors and trying to be clear about who students should communicate with if they were having trouble as well. Like, do they talk to their instructor? Does the instructor talk to the chair, Lizz, of the department? Really, we wanted them to come talk to the librarians, but then there's the whole, you know, which librarian do they talk to? We're adjuncts, you know. So communication was always a challenge, but we had lots of meetings and tried to stay on top of things as best we could.
Thank you, Kelly. Ken?
Yeah, the big problem in terms of research, I think, is because there are about 11 trillion exceptions to the rules, and students often come to our classes not knowing them, and that's okay, because the whole point is that you have to learn these things to understand. For one example, students will say, well, look, I found this in the databases. It's from a scholarly journal. And I'll say, that's just a book review, you know, from the journal. It's not, I mean, yeah, the information is real, but why not go to the actual book, or, you know, go to an article by that author or something like that. So it's so difficult to explain all of the little exceptions and all the rules that fold around the search for meaning and truth.
Thanks, Ken. Let's see, we have, I don't see any other hands raised for this question. It looks like, although Michelle Bishop, yes, you can turn on Michelle's mic. I know that if you're able to, Caitlin, and she can join, there we go. Okay, Michelle?
Yeah, thanks. For me, I found that obviously when you talk about misinformation or, you know, misleading information, there are a lot of political aspects to it. And I found myself really uncomfortable with even broaching any topic that had any politics attached to it. And because a lot of what we do as librarians include the one-shot 50-minute instruction session, I was also really concerned about any kind of divisive discussions derailing the actual class session. So I did have to deal with my own fear, you know, resistance to talking about topics that have any political leanings to it. Thanks.
Great points. Thanks, Michelle. Okay, so our second question is, what was the most surprising or unexpected outcome during or as a result of your program or instructional approach that you implemented? Amber.
So we used, you know, the questioning approach, and one of the things, Julie and I also do a lot of research on the Gen Z population. And so as her in sports management, me as millennial, we like really thrive on competition. And so we just kind of assumed that her classes would, since they're in sports management, most of them are athletes in there, they would also enjoy competition, and that would like really motivate them to learn. And so there we're assuming. And what we noticed was one class, they really did love the competition. It was driving their desire to learn. They wanted the game. I should have done the game at the beginning. But another class, they kind of didn't really care at all. I mean, they participated, so that's, you know, appreciated, but it really was not motivating to them. And so that's just something that's very interesting, that we kind of assume things. We put some of our maybe generational stereotypes on our younger students, and they really don't have those same learning desires and learning patterns. So that's something that practical real world that we kind of learned as we went.
Thank you, Amber. Would anybody else like to respond to this question, or should we move on to the next one? Oh, Danielle.
Yeah, the most surprising thing to me after incorporating the Google Forms activity was just how much students appreciated it and how little they actually expected when they walked into the classroom to walk away with help on their actual individual projects. So it really sort of, gave me new perspective because when they're walking in, I realized they're just thinking they're going to get the library spiel and that's it. And they were not realizing, they were going to get individual help in these sessions. So I used to deploy the Google Forms with a Kahoot game. And after starting using Google Forms, the activity actually on the surveys, students liked it even more than the game. So that really surprised me. I wasn't expecting that.
Thank you. Franki?
So I wanted to build on something that Danielle said, and she's working at the library that I take my classes to. And one of the things that surprised me the most is how successful this has been. That when Theresa does evaluate the different standards that the library is trying so hard to give to the teachers and to the students, that this all works. It works. It works for us when we do not one session, we do 2 sessions. It works when we use all the worksheets. And so for me, the surprising thing was the successfulness of it. Can you say successfulness? The success of it, which is very motivating to me and to Theresa as working on this project. So, yeah.
Thank you. Let's see, Danielle just answered, so I'm assuming she said, does anybody else want to respond to that question? Okay, so we'll move on to number 3. What general recommendations would you give to someone trying to implement a program or method of instruction similar to yours? Theresa.
Yeah, hi, everyone. Obviously, the presentation today was talking about a very formal assessment program, but even with that, we had some challenges, and the recommendations would be for sure to have good collaboration with the faculty you're working with. Franki and I obviously have that collaboration. Anything we want to change, we run by each other. And the other thing is, for something like this and assessing research papers, make sure you have standards for the paper going into it, and the fact that the faculty holds those standards. For example, the length of the paper, the requirement for MLA, in this case, works cited and in text, the types of resources. We've had some other faculty who participated that didn't hold students to using any academic sources. So of course, the students are going to default to Google. So making sure if you're running something like this kind of program, make sure that you have standards for the paper requirements in place. That's what I would certainly say. Thanks.
Thank you. Kathy?
All right, I want to turn my video back on. Yeah, I would definitely echo what Theresa said about collaborating. Obviously, that's going to be really key so in particular for my case, when you're bringing in students. I also think you really need to know your audience. You need to know your students. You need to know their technology comfort level when you're specifically doing something like what I was doing with seniors. Have a sense of how many are going to college, how many are going into the workforce, how many are going into the military. But I think in general, if you're looking at any programs where you're working with students, you really need to know your students. Kind of know not just about them personally, but also kind of as a group, what they're familiar with. I think that's going to be kind of key. And a lot of people talked about that at the beginning, was starting with a pre-test or a survey or something, just to get a sense of students' familiarity and comfort level.
Thank you, Kathy. Ken?
Franki and Theresa talked about it a little bit, but it's really important to give the students meaning, to give them agency and to make the assignments that they do in some way relevant to them, and to point out how the work that we give them, especially in freshman comp, isn't just busy work, right? They're building the foundation of their later work in school. So I always try to make sure that as much as possible, because sometimes you just can't get the students to put that worth into the work, to point out to them that all the work they're doing does have a purpose and can help them figure something out about themselves or about their future life. It's not just busy work that we have to do. And the same thing goes for the library sessions. Yes, it's kind of sort of mandatory to have the library session, and they have to learn how to go through the databases. But it's more than that. It's something that actually is very valuable for them if they let it be that way.
Thank you, Ken. And so for our final question, I'm going to ask our panelists to respond with a phrase or sentence summary, because we are running out of time, which is, were there any silver linings in terms of the pandemic? What positive came out of that for you in the work that you do? So a phrase or sentence about that. Theresa, would you like to start us off?
Sure, I mentioned it during my presentation, but the surprise was use of Google Forms, which we had used for other initiatives, but we weren't sure exactly what we were going to be doing in an online environment, completely online, and that use of that really moved everything along forward for me. So that was a surprise in a way, and it was a great benefit. It's something I'll continue to do even in in-person classes.
Thank you. Danielle?
Yeah, the same with Google Forms. What I found, because I had been using the Google Forms pre-COVID, my transition to online teaching was really smooth because it worked actually even better in the online environment. As I mentioned before, I not only was able to show students now what they could do to improve their searches, I could actually send them a link to that improved search. And the faculty that I worked with and the students I worked with really like that. Some want to continue doing it online because of that. So there was, that was the perk that worked really well.
Thank you. Ken?
The silver lining to all of this is I really think that come the fall, all of the students will be so happy to be together, to be in real classes, that I'm really hoping it's going to be a great semester.
Great point. Kathy?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. One of the things I enjoyed a lot this year was how much we craved being together. And I feel like I got to know people, even though a lot of it was virtual, but still we were able to have some real bonding experiences online, which surprised me.
Thank you. Kelle?
Thanks. I think for us, one of the silver linings was the opportunity to reevaluate this course that we had been doing, or the session we've been doing for a long time. We'd been doing it grounded, but having to convert it to online gave us a chance to realize pieces of it that were outdated, that even if we had continued to do it fully grounded, it needed to be updated. So this sort of forced us into looking at things anew again, which was great.
Great, thank you. And it looks like everyone who wanted to respond to that question has done so, and it's a great way to wrap this up. Looking forward to the fall, to our students being excited to be together again in person, and excited to be researching and learning new information literacy skills. I want to wrap it up by thanking all the participants today, all of our panelists, our school and college librarians who are academic librarians. I should say, you can tell I'm from a K-12 environment, who joined us today. There was a lot of logistics to setting this up. There was a lot of communication that you had to put up with. You did an amazing job sharing information. Remind everybody that those slides that you will get have all those great references, links to information, forms, and the things that people were talking about today, as well as contact information from our presenters. So if you want to reach out to them, feel free to do so. But yes, thank you all for joining us for such a wonderful and inspiring session, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks, and thank you, Sue, for making this happen. This was your idea. Like, you sent an email inquiring, and then it turned into this whole big thing. So,
and I got voluntold for it. So that was okay.
I appreciate you doing that. And we're gonna wrap up real quick because the next session is starting right now. It's the last session of the day, and that's bridging the digital divide. So hope to see you all there.
Thank you.
Thank you.